Greetings and salutations. Today, Hawk Watchers marks the 44th anniversary of the Attica prison uprising that left 43 dead and 89 others seriously injured. On September 9th, 1971, prisoners at the maximum security Attica Correctional Facility near Buffalo, New York, rose up against their jailers and seized control of the prison, taking 39 prison guards and employees hostage, demanding, among other things, better living conditions and rehabilitation programs. One of the strongest voices during the uprising was prisoner Elliot L.D. Barkley, who at just 21 years old stated, "We are men. We are not beasts and do not intend to be beaten or driven as such." The entire prison populace has set forth to change forever the ruthless brutalization and disregard for the lives of the prisoners here and throughout the United States. 44 years later, the United States has more than 2.4 million people in some level of incarceration, and many of the same issues of overcrowding, lack of legitimate rehabilitation, and prisoner abuse that forced the prisoners of Attica to revolt are still thriving behind the walls of our prisons, along with a host of new problems like privatization and the school-to-prison pipeline found in economically disadvantaged communities throughout this country. So today, let us examine the problems and potential solutions of the prison industrial complex as we start watching the Hawks.
If you want to know what's going on in your city and your streets, never back down like Tyrell, and the truth is what you seek. To analyze, investigate from the bottom to the top. You speak your mind like Sean Stone, whether they like it or not. I got Tabitha, Miss Wallace, with the wisdom and the pearl. Between the outrage and the evidence, what's going on in this world?
Watching the Hawks, watching the Hawks, watching the Hawks. Listen when they talk.
Welcome, everybody, to Watching the Hawks. I am Tyrell Ventura.
And I am Tabitha Wallace.
Today, on the 44th anniversary of the Attica Uprising, we'll be examining the issues facing the U.S. prison system. And today, we are joined in our D.C. studio by frequent guest of the program, John Kiriakou. He was for blowing the whistle on the CIA's torture program. John was sentenced to he's pled to 30 months in prison, 25 of which he served in Loretto, Pennsylvania, where he was transferred to a halfway house in Washington, D.C. He is now an outspoken advocate of prison reform. And from our New York City studio, we are joined by Jeffrey Deskovic, founder and president of the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice. In 1990, at the age of 17, Jeffrey was sent to jail on rape and murder charges for a crime he did not commit. Jeffrey spent 16 years in prison before DNA evidence exonerated him. His foundation now works to exonerate falsely convicted prisoners and to reintegrate them into society. Welcome, gentlemen, and thank you for joining us today. Jeffrey, I want to start with you and ask you, what do you see in prison that's similar to the conditions in Attica? How are prisoners unfairly subjected to solitary confinement, inspections, harassment, poor food, sanitation? Have we seen any changes since Attica, and what was your experiences like?
Well, I think we've seen some changes in that there is more of a pretense now at rehabilitation. Certainly rehabilitative programs were something that the men in Attica wanted, thus the introduction of schooling and vocational shops and trades. However, almost all the curriculum is obsolete. Certainly, the verbal abuse is not changed. There's still physical violence. I think that the introduction of the camera provides some level of protection that didn't exist before, but it still goes on. Definitely, special housing unit I consider to be a form of torture. There's a strong relationship between that and increase for mental health problems. Officers conducting searches of prison cells, not in a dignified manner, but instead just throwing pictures around, sometimes into the toilet, leaving a cell a wreck as opposed to leaving it the way that they found it. Those things are still going on. There's still the indifference by the higher-ups in security, sergeants, lieutenants, captains, prison administration, all look the other way. As happened before, the courts are still hands-off.
Wow,
yeah.
That's incredible.
All they have to do is just invoke the word security, and suddenly, scrutiny stops. But I'm an advocate that simply labeling something as security shouldn't end an inquiry. I mean, I would have the security personnel explain why something is necessary security-wise and subject that to scrutiny also, and only allow those procedures to stand that have a legitimate security function.
Very interesting stuff.
John, how, in your experience, I know you've talked a little bit about being a 10 by 16 cell, for 4 people and sharing 6 toilets with 250 other people, as just a couple of small examples. What was your experience like when we look back at things like Attica? Are those problems being heard, like you said, or is it just as bad with the same things?
I think there's a difference really between prisons at the state level and prisons at the federal level. Everybody says that federal prisons are better. I found lots of problems in the federal prison in which I served my time. And a lot of the guys with whom I spoke who had served time in state prisons said that the feds are better. With that said, Jeffrey's exactly right. Mental health is treated as a disciplinary issue. And you will find, I would say, a majority of people in the special housing unit, which is what solitary confinement is called, are really people who have mental health issues who are not being medicated or not being properly medicated in prison.
Wow. Well, now, John and Jeffrey, you both, got out of prison and have both been, huge advocates for reform. John, the Bureau of Prisons, which is a sub-agency of the Department of Justice, said that it was inappropriate for you to speak out on prison reform as part of your work at the Institute for Policy Studies.
Yes, they did.
Yeah, and now, why did the Bureau do that? Were they afraid you had too much of a voice of experience from being there? I just can't see how having experience in prison would be inappropriate for you to speak out on prison reform.
On the day I turned myself in to go to prison, I was made to sign several forms indicating that I had been designated as a high threat prisoner. And when I questioned this, I was told that, well, it's just paperwork. It was because of the nature of my crime. So I filed a Freedom of Information Act request to see what exactly they had on me. And what I found, it was actually accidentally released to me because it was stamped at the bottom, FOIA exempt, do not release to inmate. But it said, caution, inmate has access to the press. And that's why I was deemed a high threat prisoner.
Wow, that's incredible.
Because you might talk.
I might talk.
You might, again, blow the whistle.
And I can tell you, I personally witnessed prison guards and prison administrators committing federal crimes in prison. And there's just no way to extract justice.
No, not in that situation. I mean,
No, not in that situation.
It really is the fundamental situation of who's going to believe you.
That's right,
You're a
because
criminal
you're just a
and-
criminal.
Yeah.
And they're pseudo cops.
Right.
So who's going to be believed?
Right. Well, now, Jeffrey, your foundation works to help free prisoners who were wrongfully convicted of crimes like yourself. How is it that so many people are sent to prison for crimes that they didn't commit? What are the key factors? Is it corruption, or is there something else out there that we're not seeing?
Well, it's more procedurally, we're not using best practices. So we need things like videotaping interrogations, which would make clear whether or not a suspect really is voluntarily giving statements, whether they're being coerced, whether they're volunteering non-public facts, or whether the cops are giving them details, whether threats or false promises or other improper things are going on. We need improved identification procedures. I mean, misidentification has been the cause of wrongful convictions in 75% of the cases. Prosecutorial misconduct is huge. There's lots of articles stating that both the federal and on the state level that prosecutorial misconduct is rampant and prevalent. We need a commission on prosecutor conduct, which would be like an oversight board which could investigate and discipline rogue prosecutors. Most people would be shocked if they knew that as a litigant in a federal lawsuit, you have more discovery than what you do when you're a criminal defendant originally defending yourself against the charges. There's not an even playing field between the public defender's office and the prosecutor's office in terms of manpower, in terms of finances. It's not unusual for one public defender to represent 100 people at the same time. They don't have equal pay. I think as a society, we're loath to fund public defenders because we claim that there's a presumption of innocence. It's really the other way around. I believe that the system works a presumption of guilt. And why would we going to put a lot of money to defend criminals? But the problem is that there are people who are innocent and are going to get caught into that net.
Wow.
No. John, I want to ask you, we've got a couple of minutes left, and there's something really important that I feel like isn't getting enough attention, and that's private prisons.
Yes.
What role, final thoughts from both of you, if we have time, what role do private prisons play in the increase in incarceration in America and the issues that you're seeing inside of those? And, you know, in both your opinions, John, start with you. Do you think that private prisons should be done away with?
Oh, absolutely. I think that there's no room for private prisons in a true justice system. The only way for private prisons to succeed, and remember, they're publicly traded companies, they're for-profit entities, is for them to be full. And that means keeping people in prison for longer periods of time and on crimes that might otherwise not even warrant prison time. It's not unusual for prisoners in private prisons to be denied access to medical care. It's not unusual for 200 men to share one broken toilet. I know that because one of my cellmates experienced that. There really is no place for prison in the for private prisons, rather, in the United States.
Wow.
Jeffrey, we have about 30 seconds left. What are your thoughts on private prisons? Should they be done away with?
Absolutely. It's unethical to make money off of prisoners. I don't think that that's what's driving it necessarily by itself. I think that the Correction Officers Union is a big part of it. I mean, like in New York, for example, they pushed back really hard against efforts to reform the Rockefeller drug laws because they knew that if there were less people incarcerated, there'd be a need for less guards, and so they linked that to their own financial well-being.
Well, I have to say, you guys, thank you very much for this informative talk that we've had. Jeffrey Descovich of the Jeffrey Descovich Foundation, John Kiriakou, thank you guys very much for coming on today and enlightening us on your experiences and, you know, some of the things we need to change in the prison system. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
As we go to break, Hawk Watchers, don't forget to let us know what you think of the topics we've covered on our Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube pages. Coming up, we'll be talking with Andrea James, the founder of Families for Justice as Healing, about the effect the U.S. prison system has on female offenders and their families. Stay tuned to Watching the Hawks.
More than 2.2 million adults are incarcerated in federal, state, or county lockup in the United States. As you can imagine, they all need the bare necessities: food, clothing, and beds. But what about communication with loved ones? Is that a necessity? You might say yes, but a number of private companies in America are saying sure, if you can pay up. RT's Lindsay France takes a look at how corporate America is collecting on incarceration in a way that wreaks havoc on families.
It's a pay-to-play system to keep in touch with loved ones in our nation's correctional facilities. It's lucrative for companies like Global Tellink and Securus, which control 80% of inmates' communications with the outside world. One phone call can cost up to $1 per minute. According to the Pew Research Institute, there are 2.7 million minor children who have a parent in jail or prison. So how do you keep the family together with one parent locked up for years far away?
It's a 2-hour car drive. Those are the closest prison. Everything else is 4 hours away, 5 hours away, or, you know, a plane ride away. Do you know what I mean? And so most of these people are coming from impoverished communities. You know, very difficult for them to get to visit. I mean, prison breaks down most bonds, honestly, parental, spousal, whatever.
Tony Lewis is the college-educated son of a man serving a life sentence without parole for a drug crime committed 26 years ago. He's just penned a new book titled Slug, A Boy's Life in the Age of Mass Incarceration. With parents like his in prisons across state lines, phone calls are the only way to keep in touch sometimes.
GTL contracts with LA County, so I called them to set up an account. It was as easy as using Skype. Called to set up the account with a fictional inmate inside. The nice lady on the phone told me that first off, I'd be hit with a nearly $5 sign-up fee, possible service fee, possible facilities fee, depending on where I wanted to call into. And get this, when my fictional friend or loved one gets out and I ask for a refund on the money left inside my account, I get hit with a fee then too. And get this, I don't get to know the rate on the call, whether it's to these payphones outside, which so many people use, or if it's to my 202 area code cell phone. I don't know the rate until the call is made and paid for. She couldn't tell me what that rate is.
In-state calls account for 92% of calls made, and they're not capped. If the FCC caps rates and fees across the board, then how could the companies corner the market and make a killing? Easy. By barring face-to-face visitation, leaving only phone lines and video screens as a link to loved ones. Something Securus has secured in numerous contracts with jails across the country. Lindsay France, RT.
Our next guest, Andrea James, has spent 25 years working within the criminal justice system. Her professional experience as a public defender and former criminal defense attorney, along with her personal experience as an incarcerated woman, give her unique insight into what is greasing the prison pipeline for more and more women across the United States. After her release from the Danbury, Connecticut prison, now made famous by the hit show Orange is the New Black, she started the organization Families for Justice is Healing in order to use her experience and knowledge to advance the issues of human rights in America's prisons. And she wrote the book Upper Bunkies Unite, which gives another perspective of prison life for women in this country. Andrea James joins us now from Boston. Welcome, Andrea.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for being here. According to data from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, the number of women in prison has increased 646% from 1980 to 2010. In your book, Upper Bunkies Unite, you talk about, in one example, a 70-year-old woman called Grandma who's given a 30-year sentence for selling cocaine. What part have sentencing guidelines played in the prison pipeline for women?
Well, certainly, sentencing guidelines has increased the incarceration rates of women in this country. There was a time in this country when we would not have sent women to prison for the things that we incarcerate them for now today. And just for a little bit of clarity, we actually started Families for Justice